Welcome to A Walk in the Park with Gil. My name is Gil Penalosa, and I was born in Bogota, Colombia, where as head of parks, I led the design and construction of over 200 parks and took a small program called Ciclovia Open Streets and turned it into the world's largest pop-up park. Every Sunday, the city opens 120 kilometers, 75 miles of streets to people and closes them to cars. And then magic happens. Over 1 million people come out to walk, run, bike, play, and mostly to enjoy meeting each other as equals. 17 years ago, I created 880 Cities, a non-profit organization based in Toronto, Canada, where I live. As of the start of the pandemic, I had worked in 345 cities in all continents. This bi-weekly web talk is a way of giving back, always free, each time with fascinating guests who present on parks and cities. And then we have a dialogue. I team up with 880 Cities and World Urban Parks, where I was elected chair twice and now serve as ambassador. I hope you'll find these bi-weekly sessions interesting and useful. Welcome. It's so nice to have you here. Central Park is so close to my heart. In so many ways, I've been going for many years. Actually, when I was commissioner in Bogota, I started a program that I spoke about in a few sessions ago about open streets. And it was because I was reading, when I became commissioner, Olmsted's book, one of his books, where he said that he wanted to, one of the things why he wanted Central Park is because he wanted people to meet as equals. He said in New York, 170 years ago, almost everybody hated everybody, the locals and the immigrants, the rich and the poor, the black and the white. And he said, we need people to meet as equals. And from that idea, and I think that Central Park has been such an iconic place. And now the Conservancy, when I go, I worked in over 350 different cities, and almost everywhere, when I talk to mayors, to commissioners, they talk to me about Central Park. The other day I was in Taiwan, and in Taiwan, the mayor said, in one of the cities, the mayor said, oh, I want to manage it like Central Park. So you have raised the level of expectations of people. You have provided such a wonderful example. I want people to also know that I always say nothing is to copy and paste. Like we do on the computers, but we can adapt and improve. Every single thing that you're gonna hear from Betsy, it's gonna be relevant to urban parks anywhere in the world. Betsy Smith, President and CEO of Central Park, thank you very much for having accepted the invitation. The screen is yours. People are very eager to hear about the past, the present, and the future. If people have any questions, please write on the Q&A. And then when we have the dialogue with Betsy, I will include some of your questions. Thank you.
Listen, it's just, can everyone hear me? I am delighted to be here. I'm always delighted to talk about Central Park. There's a lot of sort of big messages about the park that are relevant, I think, to everyone in every country. I think you're right, Gil. I think that parks have become increasingly important and people are realizing the power of parks. But there's a lot of lessons with regard to Central Park and its importance to the country, to the world, to its care and management. So I look forward to sharing a lot of these thoughts with everyone today. So thank you so much for having me. Well, what I'd like to do in this presentation actually is to talk a little bit about the history of the park and also its impact. The Central Park has a fascinating history, both in terms of it being a major infrastructure project for a growing city, but also its impact on the population. So the forward button. So I just want to say I'm Betsy Smith. I've been the chief executive of the Central Park Conservancy for 4 years. The Central Park Conservancy has a contract with the city of New York to manage and maintain and restore Central Park. So we are officially entrusted with the care of Central Park. This is something that many people don't know. Many people think the city of New York actually cares for the park. That's not necessarily true. Central Park Conservancy, and you'll learn in this presentation on why we are in the situation we are with the Central Park Conservancy being the steward of this really important space. So I thought I would start with just a quotation, and I'll go through all these slides. There's quite a few slides actually, but I think hopefully you'll find them interesting. But I wanted to start with the mission of the Central Park Conservancy. It is to celebrate and preserve Central Park as a sanctuary from the pace and pressures of city life, enhancing the enjoyment and well-being of all. As you see in this picture, that is the Bethesda Fountain. It's right in the middle of the park. It's the most iconic spot in the park, actually. And that is the Central Park Conservancy staff taken last year in the middle of COVID. But we all were here working, caring for the park because, as Gil said, Central Park was absolutely essential to everyone's mental and physical health during COVID. So we kept our entire staff working and the park was massively used. It is a world famous public park, and it was originally designed and conceived by the city fathers in the late 1850s to offer urban dwellers an experience of the countryside, a place to escape from the stresses of urban life and to commune with nature and fellow New Yorkers. The city at the time was growing. And it was a very intense place. There was tremendous immigration. New York City was booming and the living conditions were terrible. And so the city fathers felt that in order for New York to really compete with the other major cities of the world, the London and Parises of the world, we really needed to have a beautiful park and we needed to think about the health of our citizens. So the park was conceived and the land was set aside, which I'll go into its history in a minute. But this is relative to really what I want to talk about today and really sort of my ultimate message about the management and care of public space. Almost since the day it was built, the park has been in a cycle of restore and decline. And many, many people have been tempted to modify the park, build in it, put structures in it, change it, create transportation alleys through it. And when the Conservancy was formed in 1980, we set out to break that cycle of restore and decline, which I'm going to go through with you this morning. And we have been successful in that. It's been expensive. It's taken us a long time, but the last 40 years represents the longest sustained period of health in the park's entire history. And I'm going to go through these moments because I think it puts in perspective the fragility of these natural open spaces for all of these cities that depend on them. So these periods of restore and decline started with the park was designed and planned and constructed starting in the late 1850s. Almost immediately upon its completion, it started its first decline. Robert Moses was a famous parks commissioner during the Depression, worked for a famous mayor of New York, Mayor LaGuardia, which I'll touch on later. And he actually invested some resources, but also made some changes to the park. And then famously, Central Park went on a steep decline in the late 60s and 70s. And in 1970, with the city was bankrupt and the park was abandoned. And that really led to the creation of the Central Park Conservancy to, in effect, rescue Central Park, which was, I like to say this, literally disappearing because it was a natural landscape that was completely ignored by the city. So let me just start with the early years, the planning, design, and construction of Central Park. As I had mentioned, in the 1840s, New York was one of the fastest growing cities in the country. It was one of the largest. And as diversity was increasing and the downtown population was soaring, there were private parks that were being created to take care of the wealthy and the well-to-do residents who surrounded those parks. But social reformers at the time really felt that this was inconsistent with American values, and they understood that a public park could reverse this situation. Central Park, in the high-minded mentality of our city fathers at the time, was the first purpose-driven public park in the country. So this was actually a municipality putting aside 840 acres for the benefit of the public. It was the first time anything of that scale had ever been done. What happened is that the city fathers decided that the best way to get the best plan for the park was to create a competition. So I thought it was interesting that here's the little announcement that was in the paper, the Board of Commissioners of the park offering to pay for plans that people would be given. The park goes from 5th Avenue to 8th Avenue, from 59th Street to 110th Street. It's a very, very large piece of property. It was, I'll go into this in a minute, but it was a tremendous chunk of real estate in the middle of New York. All of you who have seen maps of Manhattan realize that the park is a tremendous amount of property, which you have to give the city fathers credit for putting aside so much valuable real estate for the benefit of the public. So this is the announcement. The winners of the competition were Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux. Frederick Law Olmsted was a farmer and, importantly, a writer. And most importantly of all, in fact, I could even argue even more than being a landscape architect, Frederick Law Olmsted was a social reformer. He was a writer for the New York Times. He had done a lot of work in exposing the evils of slavery, had done a lot of traveling down south. So he was very conscious of the social obligations that cities have to its people. And a lot of the vision of the park was his. He teamed up with a very, very talented architect, Calvert Vaux, and they together submitted what was called the Greensward Plan. They set out to address this, what they called a tear in the social fabric, and to create a space where everyone of all people, regardless of their backgrounds, their race, their professions, their wealth, could get together. And he was inspired with this idea by his extensive travels in Europe, especially his visit to Birkenhead Park, which is outside Liverpool. It was the first publicly funded park in England. So he saw that, and he saw the benefits of everyone, all classes mixing together. And to him, he felt that this was American democracy in action, and that the government needed to support that kind of social reform. Here is the Greensward Plan. This is the winning. It was the winning entry in the competition. The old reservoir was in place, and the new reservoir had yet to be built. But as we'll see in this plan, he had a very bucolic vision of what this plan should be like. The other plans that were submitted were much more regimented, much more formal. And it was his idea that what people should really do when they go to Central Park is forget that they're in the city. The whole point of it was to be a contrast to the crowded conditions of a very, very rigorous, very rigid urban grid that was Manhattan. Manhattan was turned into the grid that we're all familiar with. It was mapped out in 1811. And so the city fathers taking this much space in the middle of the grid was really an opportunity for Frederick Law Olmsted to enact that vision. And here he is. The primary purpose of the park is to provide the best practical means of healthful recreation for the inhabitants of the city of all classes. The park is intended to furnish healthful recreation for the poor and the rich, the young and the old, the vicious and the virtuous, so far as each can partake therein without infringing on the rights of others and no further. This is a very important thing which we have interpreted, and I'll go over this also a little bit later, but the idea is that everyone has a right to the park, but no one at the expense of anyone else. So that is something that we have tried very hard to manage over the years. This is today in 2022, we're all talking about major infrastructure projects. America in particular is spending billions of dollars to restore its infrastructure. This was a massive infrastructure project of America at the time. In the spring of 1858, more than 3,000 people were dredging, clearing, grading, and planting, remodeling literally every feature of this landscape. The topographical profile of this 843 acres, it was extremely rocky. There was huge, beautiful, big rock outcroppings. There was lots of swamps. There were some people and communities, but very few living in this part of Manhattan. But it was very rocky, very swampy. And what Frederick Law Olmsted had to do was completely reconfigure this property. The labor was drawn from Irish and German, from the poorest people in the city who needed jobs working in construction. And interestingly, just for racial relations, African Americans were almost entirely excluded from the workforce. There was too much racial strife in America at the time to try to mix everybody on this project. So the city fathers approved the idea that the Irish and the German were going to be, in effect, the exclusive builders of the park. There were some very, very big early infrastructure projects in America at the time. The Erie Canal, which connected the Great Lakes to Albany, which really opened up the entire Midwest to New York City. The Erie Canal is really credited with creating the power of New York City by funneling the wealth of the Midwest into New York. Central Park in 1858 and the Croton Aqueduct was the crucial element in the growth of the city, as it allowed fresh water to be directed into a city that was growing as rapidly as New York. City would have been completely stymied had it not had the source of water from upstate New York through the Croton Aqueduct, which is a tremendously complicated, very sophisticated engineering effort on the part of the Water Board to bring fresh water to New York. So interestingly, the park, the area that was the park, there was an African-American community, and I mention this here for two reasons. It wasn't just that the park was, that the area of the park was just all rock outcrops and swamps. There were small settlements, there were small farms through a process called eminent domain, which is the right of a municipality or a government to take property for public use. That is exactly what happened in this case. City fathers took those 843 acres and reassigned them to public use. People were displaced. And one of these was a African-American enclave that existed for about 30 years, which was a very interesting thing that we have done a tremendous amount of research about the African-American population of what is called Seneca Village, which is on the west side of the park in the low 80s. When the park was created, these people were displaced, and it was a complicated situation. It was one of the first free Black communities in the North, and it was a healthy, thriving community. So it was in retrospect a sad development that they were in sort of in the past. The pre-park, and there's a book that's about to come out on the pre-park very shortly. It does actually highlight another aspect of the Central Park Conservancy's work, which is to really understand all the communities that were in and are currently around the park. These pictures I thought were interesting for those of you who've been to New York. This is Central Park and its construction. One of the very, very important reasons why Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux won the competition for the park was because one of the things that they were required to do was to connect the east and west sides of Manhattan through the park on what were called transverse roads. And their genius actually was to sink the transverse roads below the grade of the park, so that when you were in the park, you felt that you had this huge 800-acre expanse. It was actually the origins of the original subways, sinking the grade of crosstown traffic. And these two pictures show really the mammoth construction that required, which, by the way, without machines, no tractors, no forklifts. This is just horses, carts, and men. But as I said, almost immediately upon the completion of the park was tremendously powerful, tremendously attractive to people. It was a huge new idea. It offered huge benefits, and people started to use the park very, very heavily, almost from the beginning. And because there was so much property, and because it had been improved, and lawns and trees and grass planted, people were already starting to change it, wanting to do things to the park that were contrary to what Olmsted and Vaux had originally envisioned, which was basically open space to be enjoyed as open space, not as specific recreational facilities. By the early 20th century, the park had started a serious decline. Rustic work was deteriorating, the ground was eroding, structures were dismantled. And really, and this is the origins of the Central Park Conservancy, which we have found to be true throughout the history of the park, was that it wasn't just about the money. It was about the fact that there wasn't stewardship and oversight of this important public asset. That was the reason through all of these cycles of restore and decline. The management changed, the political situation was different, the financial condition of the city swung from high to low. And in all of that, the park was sort of bantered back and forth between these competing forces. And here are pictures of the park around the turn of the century, almost. Of course, I'm going to show you a lot of pictures on how beautiful the park is today. But the park is a natural landscape, and just like your backyard, it deteriorates if you don't do anything to it. And floods and water and storms take the trees down, erode the landscapes. And this is what Central Park was looking like towards the end of the early part of the 20th century. This was a picture in 1931 of the Central Park Reservoir, the original reservoir. This was going to be dismantled and turned into the Great Lawn, but the city had run out of money to do that. That's the Metropolitan Museum, by the way, that big building on the upper left corner. And when the reservoir was dismantled, it was in the middle of the Great Depression. The Great Depression was 1932, 1933, and the many homeless families created shacks there. I mean, New York, like all of America, was suffering terribly in the Depression, and people just can't possibly believe that this is actually around. That's the museum. That's the Museum of Natural. That's the Metropolitan Museum up on the other side there on the upper left corner again. This was where the Great Lawn is. Robert Moses, I mentioned earlier, a very, very powerful Parks Commissioner, was hired by Fiorello LaGuardia, a beloved mayor. He did many good things, actually, Robert Moses. He united all of the parks departments across the boroughs, and he started cleaning up and investing federal money into Central Park. There had been a very corrupt government before LaGuardia, and LaGuardia was committed to cleaning up municipal government in general, and Robert Moses was his vehicle to do the same with the park. The park was in tremendously compromised state at that time, and it was at the time just abused by people and a lack of oversight and management. So Robert Moses did funnel a lot of federal and city money that he could find into the park. He also changed the park, and he probably changed it in a way that Frederick Law Olmsted would not have approved. Olmsted did not feel that there should be any dedicated recreation facilities in the park. In fact, there should be nothing dedicated to anything in the park except the natural landscapes. Robert Moses disagreed with that. And he was the one who added the playgrounds. This is the Central Park Zoo, which was a big addition to the southern part of the park. He added restaurants. This is the Boathouse Restaurant. It was a rustic boat shelter when Olmsted had designed it, and he turned it into a full-fledged restaurant along with Tavern on the Green. And he put the skating rinks in. Woolman Rink was built in 1954. Skating has always been a very, very popular activity in the park. And so he was responding to people's wanting to have recreational facilities. Predictably, Robert Moses overplayed his hand, and he really started to put infrastructure in the park that the public didn't like. And the public started to realize that Robert Moses had ideas for Central Park that were contrary to the original idea behind the park. And in this very famous photograph, famous to us, that is, a group of mothers got together and stood in front of the bulldozers that he was trying to create a parking lot next to Tavern on the Green and take down one of the playgrounds. And the mothers all objected, and they got their chairs out, and they just became a big public protest to what Robert Moses was doing. So with his fading reputation, Moses stepped down as Parks Commissioner in 1960. He was pretty reviled by that time. He was the person, of course, responsible for creating a lot of the parkways and roadways around New York. In many ways, it created a modern city, but it also compromised the high-minded mission of Central Park. And when he finally proposed bulldozing one of the most beloved aspects of Central Park, the Ramble, which is our sort of mid-park woodlands, and turn it into a senior center, the public just said, we just don't want this. In the late 60s, New York City, like many urban cities, like many urban areas across the country, was having flight of citizens out to the suburbs. The cities were going broke. And this was a famous picture of Abe Beame, who was the mayor at the time. President Ford had been asked to invest in the city, and his answer to the mayor was drop dead. So the city was broke. The feds were not going to bail anybody out. And the park really started to decline. This is one of the lakes that had been drained. You can see the beautiful infrastructure of the park exposed. The Great Lawn was ball fields that was unirrigated, uncared for. Beautiful old original buildings in the park had declined and were deteriorating, were used as storehouses. The infrastructure of the park was crumbling. There was graffiti everywhere. Drainage was a problem. And there was just the park, as I had mentioned, was really sort of disappearing. And in 1980, a group of citizens decided to save Central Park. And this is really our history. In 1975, there was something called the Central Park Task Force. It was founded by Betsy Barlow Rogers. She was an urban planner and a writer. And she was the executive director of the task force. And the task force basically started to generate interest through volunteers and educational initiatives to try to rescue Central Park. It started out really as just small volunteer efforts with the public showing their interest in small projects around the park. And when you think about Central Park today, and I'll go a little bit into our budget later, we have an $80 million budget today. It's a tremendous operation and 350 people working on the park. But originally, what we were trying to do was just to get the public involved in taking back their park. And we have seen this with hundreds of parks around the country who communities around parks who want their parks back. And so we relate to that. That's how we started. And though we are very big today, we started as a grassroots organization. Here's the Central Park Task Force. It was a group of kids and volunteers. We tried to get everybody we could. It was sort of a social thing to do. And we actually formed an entity called the Central Park Conservancy in 1980. the purpose of which was to oversee the park and to seek private funding. This was a very new idea. Who would think about putting private philanthropic money into public space? And that's what this organization was. That is Betsy Rogers in the middle with the Parks Commissioner at the time, Gordon Davis on the right. So the first 3 years of the Conservancy were dedicated to making a plan. And I'll come back to a plan in a minute because we have just completed 40 years later a strategic plan for the care of the park. But our first plan was how do we rescue and rebuild the plan? And as this slide mentions, management comes before restoration because the founders of the park and the people leading this initiative at the time realized that without proper management and oversight with sustainable plans for care, the restoration simply was not going to be sustainable. So here we have the most rewarding things I can show you. Over 40 years, the Central Park Conservancy invested over $1 billion of private philanthropic money into the restoration of the park. It is, I often say, one of the most dramatic rescues of a public resource in our country's history. It was a magnificent landscape that was landmarked, that was famous around the world. And it took us 40 years to bring it back to Olmsted's original vision. This is the mall, beloved as it is, facing north. This is Belvedere Castle, which was a folly at the time that Olmsted designed it. It was excessively used for all sorts of activities, drugs and graffiti, and it was rescued by us twice. Actually, we've restored Belvedere, and that's the most recent restoration is on the right. Erosion was a huge problem in the park, and without proper horticultural care, the park was just eroding and disappearing. And as you can see on the right, we've spent an enormous amount of time and effort to restore the landscapes. This is the Great Lawn. It's one of our most famous pictures of restoration. The Great Lawn was basically called the Great Dust Bowl. The drainage was terrible. There was no care, and over time, we completely restored the Great Lawn in a special campaign, and you can see it. It is the most beloved aspect of the park right now. A beautiful landscape. Finally, in 1998, we had a formal agreement with the city to care for the park. We had been raising money for projects left and right, and finally in 1998, we actually, that is Mayor Giuliani signing an agreement with the Central Park Conservancy, which formalized our position as overseers of the park. So today, I think this is what all of you know. It is universally acknowledged to be one of the most important democratic and beloved public spaces in the country. And thanks to this partnership, I often say this, Central Park today is so much more than just a park. It is a model that has been emulated around the world for urban park renewal. It is a tremendously successful public-private partnership. We give the city over $80 million a year and have complete oversight of Central Park. So it is wonderful for the city and important for us. It is the biggest tourist attraction in the city. It is the most Instagrammed location in the country. We found out from Instagram. And we have over 40 million people a year visit it. This is more visitors than Disney's Magic Kingdom, Washington's National Mall, or the Golden Gate Bridge. It is recognized as one of the most important works of 19th century American art. And for that reason, and for its purpose, it is on the tentative list to become UNESCO World Heritage Site. It generates more than $1 billion in incremental tax revenues based on the value of the property around the park for the city's fiscal budget. And as Gail very astutely said in the beginning, and as all of you who are parks people know, it had a tremendous impact on the physical and well-being, mental well-being of New Yorkers, especially in the last 2 years, but really for its entire history. Today, the Central Park Conservancy has a huge responsibility. We have actually close to 345 people now caring for every aspect of the park. And just listing here some of the things that we do to maintain and restore the park. We take care of visitors and of course are completely responsible for fundraising for over 85% of the park's budget. The city contributes about 15% of the park's budget. We take care of landscape maintenance. We oversee events. Trash removal is a tremendous responsibility. We manage all the tours and public programs, oversee capital projects. And of course, we have a very important initiative, which I'll go into a minute, to help other parks around the city and around the world. And we fundraise really for the entire budget, including negotiating with the city on their share of our expenses. There have been, over the past 40 years, over 150 individual capital projects that we have overseen. More than $1 billion, as I had said, has come from private philanthropy, and about $200 to $300 million has come from the city. So the city has participated in the restoration of the park, but the lion's share of the funding has come from the private sector. So today we have about an $80 million budget with our mission of protecting and improving Central Park in perpetuity. We raise money very assiduously all year round. We've got a big development. I often say that Central Park Conservancy, our two main thrusts of our work are caring for the park and every aspect of it and raising the money to be able to do that. So we have a what I would say, very well-developed fundraising programs through all these various different aspects of institutional giving and special events and membership programs and other ways that we raise our money. Since 2014, we have spent about 5% of our budget helping other parks around the city. This really was an initiative of my predecessor, Doug Blonsky, who would receive calls from perhaps many of the people on this phone call for people who wanted to know, how did it start? How did we do it? How could we be successful? So we decided to sort of codify all of our help to other parks in something called the Central Park Institute for Urban Parks. And in that way, we have continuing education programs and share what we know about how heavily used urban parkland can be managed. We manage the parks in Harlem, right north of Central Park. We also send teams around to the other boroughs of the city. So we have a very extensive program where we assist other parks. And just a few months ago, we started something called the Central Park Climate Lab, where we are working with the Yale School of the Environment to assess the impact of global warming on heavily used urban parks and create mitigation strategies around those. So we're always looking for ways where we can help inform sophisticated and practical management of urban parkland. Our last major project in the restoration of Central Park after 40 years is the complete redevelopment of a project up in the northeast corner of the park in East Harlem that will be as I say, our capstone project. It's called the Harlem Mirror Center. It is a pool in the summer, a skating rink in the wintertime. It replaces this pool that was built in the mid-60s. This pool was a huge concrete structure that was put in the park. It is really contrary to almost every aspect of the Central Park Conservancy's vision for the park in terms of its impact on the landscapes. And it blocked actually people from investigating and being curious about the rest of the park because they couldn't get beyond the drive or this big building. This is the new facility that we're building. It's a $150 million project. As you can see on the lower side of it, we've reconnected an important waterway that will be encouraging people to investigate and discover other parts of the park by creating this pool that is getting tucked into the hillside in a much more sympathetic way to the landscapes of the park. So let me just sort of wrap up a little bit by telling you that, you know, we're in a new era right now, the Central Park Conservancy. As I mentioned, we have over 42 million visitors a year. It's just an unprecedented level of use. And it has created its own challenges. And when I say a new era, I say the restoration of the park with the completion of the Harlem Mirror Center is pretty much done. And now we've really had to figure out, how do we take care of it? So we questioned ourselves, how do we maintain this massively used park? How do we manage 42 million visitors? How are we going to fund what we need to do? And what kind of capacity do we need to do these things? This is a very different story than the restoration of the park landscape by landscape. This is, how do we care for the whole park? So we created our second plan after Betsy Barlow Rogers' first management and restoration plan. This is a plan for the stewardship of the park. It was a tremendous effort with over 100 of the managers of the park weighing in on what we needed to do to care for the park going forward. So while the city backdrop has changed and grown, Central Park's purpose remains the same: to provide a retreat for all visitors who walk through the gates. It has always been an important place where people gather. It is sort of the core of our democratic experience, with everyone coming to the park for important things, peace rallies, all sorts of protests, political rallies. And really our challenge has been to allow the park to be used as this, but to make sure that it's being done in a way that's responsible for the rest of the people who use it. And I thought I would end with this important quote from Frederick Law Olmsted: "The primary purpose of the park is to provide the best practical means of healthful recreation for the inhabitants of the city of all classes. The park is intended to furnish healthful recreation for the poor and the rich, the young and the old, the vicious and the virtuous, so far as each can partake therein without infringing on the rights of the others, and no farther." And I know I started our presentation with that, but I think it's just incredible, quite frankly, that the country is still grappling with so many of the social and racial issues that Frederick Law Olmsted was trying to grapple with when the park was formed. And it has made Frederick Law Olmsted, in his 200th birthday this year, really, he's revealed to be one of the most prescient and intelligent social reformers of his day. And we are still grappling with a lot of the problems that he was grappling with then. So that is a history of the park, a history of the Conservancy, and really a love letter to one of the most beautiful landscapes in the country. And I hope everyone has appreciated it, and I am very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Betsy. This has been amazing, very, very useful. So I thank you for your engagement and your sense of responsibility as a community leader. And I hope that everyone from everywhere around the world have enjoyed this session. And to all of the participants, and Betsy and everyone, I'm inviting you 2 weeks from today, same time, we're gonna talk about the nature and cities, how the parks, nature, and cities have an impact on the health and the well-being of everyone. Thanks a lot, Betsy. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everybody, for your patience and interest. Goodbye.